Hey there, lovely people. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Sammy, and this is a Writing Tip Tuesday. So I want to talk to you about your main character. Do you have a three-dimensional main character? Or is it just a two-dimensional character? Do they feel real to your readers? How do you get to have your main character feel real? I've got some exercises that I've come up with that can help you develop your main character a little bit more. So we'll start on each dimension. So we'll start with their first dimension. What does your character look like? What would somebody else notice about them from across the street? How do they dress? What's their hair like? What kind of effort do they put into their presentation? What would somebody get if they were in a group with them and they had to answer icebreaker? What kind of answers would your main character give to those icebreaker questions? That surface level, who am I kind of thing. Then we'll dig a little bit more into who they are internally. So we'll look at what are their personality traits? What kind of things do they emphasize about themselves when they're talking to others? This is all still outward presentation, not necessarily their internal thoughts and stuff. I would recommend going to the Myers-Briggs personality test and the Enneagram test and maybe even Harry Potter, Hogwarts houses, any kind of personality test that you can take in the mindset of your character may be super beneficial for helping you develop who their personality is and how they present themselves. So after that, we are going to go into our third dimension, and this is where everything gets a lot more complicated. The first and second dimensions are really just shaping the clay into the form of a person and sort of giving it lines and moving it like a puppet. Your third dimension is giving it the power to move on its own. It's giving the character their own agency and their own motives and giving them the reason to be a character. So the first question you should be asking your character for this third dimension is, what do they want and what do they need? Those are two very different things. Your want is what your character thinks that they need, and the need is what your character will change from receiving. They may not know what their need is, but you need to know so that you can put that into their personality. Like if I need to know how to trust somebody, I would not be trusting people. That would be a character trait because I don't know how to trust people. And that shows you how the need will come into play later on. So it's important to know as the writer what your character's needs are, even if they don't know, and really emphasize their want in the beginning of their story as they are progressing towards discovering the thing that they need. And then you can continue on into a little bit less story-driven personality factors. What does your character believe in? Why do they believe in that? What stems from their belief? If your character is Catholic, what of the Catholic religion do they believe? What of it do they feel like could have a better explanation? Why are they Catholic? Is it a familial thing? Do their parents want them to be Catholic and brought them to Catholic school? Did they discover it on their own and go to church by themselves after a traumatic event? What brings them to their belief, and why do they believe it, and how do they believe it? Any kind of belief. It doesn't even have to be like a religious thing. It could be like people are naturally bad and you shouldn't trust anyone, to continue on that need for trust, or animals are people too. Any kind of belief that they can have, dive into what causes that and how that affects their personality and how they carry themselves. What does your main character fear? What are they afraid of? And it can be something real, like snakes, or it can be something hypothetical, like dying alone. It can be any of those things, and I think you should have multiple fears for your character so that there are some maybe quirky ones, like if they're terrified of snakes and they have a run-in where they're in a garden and it's supposed to be a cute date and then a garden snake comes up and scares the crap out of them. That makes for a really cute situation, and that wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been an option if you weren't aware that your character is terrified of snakes. And then there's also like the fear of failure, and they're on this hero's journey, and if they fail, the whole world explodes, so they're terrified of failing. Anything along those lines, you should have something small all the way up to something life-threatening fear, because that'll really help your character become more realistic to your readers and make them feel more genuine. Because if you have a really strong character that is great in every other aspect but isn't afraid of anything, you run out of some of your options for conflict. And as we all know, conflict is what drives your story. So once you've answered all of these questions and you've really looked into who your character is on all three levels, and you've really dove in and given as much information as you possibly can into their psyche and their appearance and their outward presentation of themselves and their inward presentation presentation of themselves, I've got a couple of writing exercises that might make it a little bit easier to dive into your story more confidently. And they don't have to be related to your story, because I know some people don't like to outline and they like to just sort of go with the flow with the story. If you know that your story is taking place in a school, for say, and your main character is a student in the school and they have to go and they learn and they do some crazy stuff because conflict. So if your character is supposed to be in school, take them out of that and put them somewhere that they will never be in your actual story. Take them out of their school situation and put them at a rock concert, backstage at a rock concert, and just write from their perspective, write their inner monologue, write how they talk to other characters. They can be like NPCs in this situation where they just sort of have robotic dialogue. You don't really have to think about the characters that they talk to, but you really want to dive into who your character is during this exercise. Write as much as you want or as little as you want, but just go until you feel confident in your character's voice, in how they present themselves. If you're narrating from your character's perspective, make sure that they sound individual and not like you narrating for them, and really give them the chance to just breathe and like run wild and experience life as they are now an imaginary real life person. I think that exercise is a really great test to see if your character feels real, because you don't have the overbearing weight of the plot of your book and the things that you've already figured out for the story or anything like that hovering over them. You just get to test and see how they react to the world as they are currently in it. And if it feels like it's being forced or it feels unrealistic, you have the opportunity to change it without feeling like you're impacting your progress on your story, which can be really helpful for just getting going. Not having to edit as you go because you don't feel quite right about your character can be really beneficial to just making progress on your first draft or your second. When you write that exploration of your character's psyche and their presentation in a situation totally different from their story, write it, let it sit for like 2 or 3 days, sleep on it a couple of nights, and then come back to it, reread it, look over it, take some notes, look for anything in it that feels disingenuous, look for anything in it that just doesn't quite mesh with how you thought you were doing with your character, anything that makes it stand out that this is not a real person story, like anything that makes it feel a little bit fake. Take some notes. I would say put those on the side, unless you did like a digital writing, which people do. I just prefer to write on paper when I'm doing these exercises, but that's just me. So if you did a digital situation, I would make sure to save a copy of it without your comments and then send it to somebody that you trust and ask them how it sounds. And if it's somebody who already knows about your story, don't tell them that it's not your story. Just ask them how it is. Ask them for general feedback and see what you get. And if you get feedback about the character being really well fleshed out, fantastic, great. Get started on whatever notes you took on it, because you are going to be a much harder critic than anybody else is. And then get to work on your story. There's nothing holding you back now. You have a fully fledged 3-dimensional main character. If they give you any notes that are like, oh, well, the character was kind of weird at this point, I didn't really relate to this or anything like that, take those with a grain of salt. Take them. Take them and think about them. If you need to take a couple of days, I get a little bit emotionally attached to any of my work, and I know that getting feedback when I am still very close to the work can upset me. So if you need to take a few days and like reassess the feedback, make sure you get it in writing and it's not like a phone conversation. If it's a phone conversation, please take notes, because future you will appreciate it. And once you have those notes, really just look at them and look at your writing and then make adjustments. Do it again. Write from your main character's perspective in a situation different from your story again until you feel really confident in who your character is and how they talk, because it'll make your character feel so much real just by putting in a little bit extra effort at the beginning or between revisions. It'll really help you flesh out the places that don't quite fit and help you skip out on making mistakes that just make your character seem like a stereotype, or they just are a vessel for the plot flip-flop to ride-on, and anything like that. Taking the time to actually practice with your characters and put them into situations and play with their psyche and just mold them into the person that you want them to be really makes a difference. And it can drastically change your writing. I am speaking firsthand because I had a screenwriting teacher tell me to do this in college, and it changed my dialogue so much. I did not write dialogue for different characters. It was all just me talking to myself, and doing this exercise with my main character and a couple of my side characters really helped to define those people. Now it's just a required portion of my writing process, and I am sharing that with you. So let me know in the comments if you have done this. I would love to know. Let me know if it helped, if it didn't help, why it didn't help, you think. I would love to know. I love learning about other people's writing processes because I know not everybody's brain works the same way as mine. If you liked this video, please leave a like. It'll really help me out. And I will be back on Saturday for another story study and on Tuesday next week for another Writing Tip Tuesday. If you don't want to miss any of those videos, hit the subscribe button and turn on the little bell for notifications, and I will see you then.